not so happy Sunday, everyone. Hello, welcome to another Sunday musing. This one will be more musing than normal in the sense that I just have a lot of thoughts swirling around my head that I've tried to organize, that I want to share. And, Facebook, a couple days ago, I posted soliciting some thoughts, questions. What are y'all feeling and wondering about? And so I want to take a moment to talk about Charlie and many of the issues around this whole circumstance. Uh, you know, it was weird for me when this happened. I was at a conference in Dallas. I live 10 miles away from where Charlie's assassination took place. And at the time that it took place, I was in Dallas 2 miles away from where JFK was assassinated. So it was this very, very weird vibe that I experienced this week. My heart has been pretty heavy. I told my wife the other night I was coming home from Dallas, and I was reflecting on the fact that I have very thick skin. Very few things bother me or get to me. I tend to, do just fine with just about everything, and it just is what it is, right? This has weighed more deeply on my heart. This has given me more feels than I have felt in quite some time. In a lot of ways, it has been since 9/11 that I have felt the way that I've felt. I'll share a little bit more of that later as to why I think many of us have felt the feelings that we do. What is it about this event, about Charlie, about the cause that he was engaged in, that so many of us are, that has given rise to these emotions? But I always seen Charlie as a brother in arms. He and I probably agreed on 85% of things. There are plenty of issues, whether theological or political. And I've seen people on social media giving their own little qualifiers, like, oh, I didn't agree with Charlie on this, but and I don't aim to do that here. I responded to a question on Facebook asking about this. Oh, but I thought, you disagree with Charlie here and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I have had a lot of success in my career and cause by focusing on the Venn diagram overlap of where there is agreement. Sure, let's talk about disagreement. Sure, let's point out why we think that issue is wrong or whatever, right? I'm not saying to unify in total or ignore the differences, but I do think what happened to Charlie is symptomatic of the fact that we've become so divided and unable to communicate one with another across these differences, let alone work together where we disagree. A fun memory comes to mind. I have some notes that I'm sure some stuff is just going to bubble up. At the legislature in Utah, years ago, we were working on a criminal justice issue with the ACLU and my friend Marina, who was their lobbyist. And we were sitting up in the gallery above, where one floor up from where all the representatives were seated in the chamber. So it's got kind of a wraparound gallery where people can look down and observe. So she and I were sitting there to kind of monitor our bill, whatever, I don't even remember what the bill was, but there was this very conservative Republican legislator who looked up and saw us sitting together and found it so curious that he points his cell phone up at us, zooms in, takes a photo, and texts it to me and says something to the effect of like, now that's a curious sight, or, something like that. And I've had many other experiences like that since, but to me, it's demonstrative of the fact that it's not normal. It's not normal to do what Charlie did, to even just dialogue with the other side. And I think the echo chambers that we've devolved into, and, even to the point where there are two completely diverging perspectives on Charlie's killer right now. I am recording this on Saturday, the day before this is being broadcast Sunday morning. This is obviously a very fluid situation. For that reason, I'm going to try to be cautious about some of the observations I make because we're still, learning a lot and speculating a lot and whatever. But I just want to say at the outset that, I see Charlie as a brother in arms, and he was doing a lot of good and accomplished a lot of good. Made a lot of people envious. And did I agree with them on all his positions he took? No, and he was always a little too kind of Trumpy and even moderate in a lot of ways. Like Charlie is not some extreme right of center, conservative, whatever. In a lot of ways, he had like very traditional views. Let's start by focusing on the fact that, like the name of his organization suggests, this is a turning point. And I think we're seeing that in a lot, like literally this morning, as I'm recording this again on Saturday, there's like millions of people gathered in England protesting and their horrible anti-free speech laws, rallying around free speech, chanting Charlie's name. Minutes before I jumped on to start the recording, I was reading about in South Korea, there's a rally against some political oppression, whatever, and they're chanting Charlie's name, right? Like in a lot of ways, it could very well be that Charlie is this generation's Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King had a lot of dark sides to his personal life. He's not like this amazing saint that he is often depicted to be, right? When we kind of cherry pick the good quotes that he said. And Charlie was not a perfect person. He was a good man in a lot of ways, clearly from all reports, a good husband and father and employer and all the rest, right? But he wasn't perfect. And he had, again, issues that I disagree with him on. But I do feel like in a lot of ways, Charlie's martyrdom, we'll call it, gives rise to this opportunity for him to be this generation's Martin Luther King. I mean, give me a break. Rosa Parks, like what happened to Charlie is like 1,000 times worse, right? And I appreciate what Glenn Beck said the other day, that we should look at Charlie not as a conservative activist, which is how many want to brand him, or as I'll point out in a moment, a podcaster in this kind of pejorative, minimizing frame. But that, as Glenn said, we should see him as a civil rights leader, standing up for free speech, standing up for his faith, standing up for the family, standing up for Judeo-Christian morality, and on and on and on. I find it interesting as we consider that, Martin Luther King's call for nonviolence. Charlie's the same. And here we are as Latter-day Saints this week in Come Follow Me reading section 98. Which has some very interesting overlap. The Latter-day Saints, the early Mormons, were being heavily persecuted, tarred, feathered, looted, killed. And the modern revelation, now contained in section 98 of the Doctrine and Covenants, is a response from the Lord about how to handle themselves. And he says, vengeance is mine. And you need to lift up a standard of peace. You need to renounce war, proclaim peace. You need to have what I'll call a countercultural response to these altercations, to these aggressions against you, even to these killings, these murders against you. And you need to be bearers of a standard of peace. You need to be nonviolent, and only in limited exceptions would you even be justified in being violent, as the section 98 says. I'm not going to read any of it. And by the way, just given that this is an impromptu musing, this isn't going to have a lot of, my standard edits of scriptures and quotes and videos. I'm just going to read most of this stuff. And so this will just be me with maybe one or two little exceptions where I want to throw something in. So I don't have the scriptures pulled up for section 98, but, it says renounce war and proclaim peace. And only after you're repeatedly attacked, if you repeatedly are lifting the standard of peace, are you even justified in basically defending yourself and fighting back and trying to stop the enemy. This is so deeply countercultural. I'm going to talk more on this at the end, these countercultural approaches that the cause of Christ, that Christ himself require of us. And at no point then in section 98 are you commanded to go fight the enemy. Are you commanded, or what? It's just that, you're justified. Like, yeah, okay, here's this lower justification. But like the higher law is very much this non-violent approach. the first question that Charlie received at the Orem, Utah rally was from a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Perhaps some of you saw this clip. This is the one and maybe only exception I'll make to what I said about editing this video. I do want to share this clip, because Charlie's response was very magnanimous. He's like, look, I'm an evangelical Christian, but you're not going to see me doing what all these others do, just hating on Mormons. I love Mormons. Half my team is Mormon. You know, you guys are sending missionaries out. You're having more kids than you can afford. Right. So he had a lot of praise, and the crowd went wild because a lot of these, students at UVU are LDS. Here's this little clip, though, of what he said immediately after that, talking about the church.
I think it's time for Mormons. You got to get your mojo back. No more of this LGBT stuff. We need the strong Mormon church back in this country, right?
I found that curious. We need to get the strong Mormon church back. I couldn't make out. I played like 10 times, the video of like when the applause ramped up, and he said something else. I don't know what he said right after that, right? No more of this LGBT stuff. And then what else he said, but we need to get the strong Mormon church back. And the next couple of musings are going to be centered around this. Actually, they're already recorded and scheduled. Next week's is around the 30th anniversary of the proclamation, which is coming up in like a week and a half. Very timely, especially when Charlie here is talking about how the church, and he says no more of this LGBT stuff. I'll let you read into that, why he may have had that perspective of members of our church, leaders of our church, getting kind of bogged down by that cultural issue. And then the week after that, the musing is going to be on my new book, The Slow Stain, where I talk about how we as members of the church, as modern Christians, have been slowly stained by the culture of the world, looking at how past peoples have fallen prey to that trend and how we are today. And, the LGBT type issues are just one of many. And so I'll go through those in that video. But here's Charlie saying we need a strong Mormon church back. So I wanted to take a moment here and to, just by way of contrast, show what the church has done in the past few days. So the day of the shooting, what was that, Wednesday? It's been one of those things where time is just crazy, right? The day of the shooting, and after it was shortly thereafter announced that he was dead, the church issued a statement. So this is September 10th. The statement was issued by the church newsroom, the PR division. It was attributed to the church spokesperson, to no ordained leader of the church. And it said the following: "It is with great sadness that we learn of the shooting that took place at the Utah Valley University, resulting in the death of Charlie Kirk. Our prayers go out to his family at this time. We condemn violence and lawless behavior. We also pray that we may treat one another with greater kindness, compassion, and goodness. For members of the church, we reaffirm the Savior's teaching and admonition is to love our neighbor." Okay. So when I first started writing down some of these thoughts that I wanted to talk about, it was Friday evening. And so on Friday evening, I went to go look at how the church responded to George Floyd. I'll talk in a moment more about this kind of double standard and difference between these two instances. A few days after the George Floyd incident, by way of contrast, the church newsroom, PR division, spokesperson, etc., they didn't post something President Nelson did. Granted, the newsroom PR type people, I'm sure, drafted it and wrote it and published it, but it at least came out under President Nelson's social media account, attributed therefore directly to him and his thoughts. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's 5 times longer in number of words than the statement that was put out regarding Charlie. I'll share just a little snippet perhaps. He starts by saying, "We join with many throughout this nation and around the world who are deeply saddened at recent evidences of racism and a blatant disregard for human life. We abhor the reality that some would deny others respect and the most basic of freedoms because of the color of his or her skin. We're also saddened when these assaults on human dignity lead to escalating violence and unrest, which by that point, days later, it definitely was. And then he goes on to say much more. So that had 352 words compared to the 73 words that were put out the day of Charlie Kirk's assassination. By the way, that statement that the church put out the day of Charlie Kirk's assassination did not call it an assassination, did not call it murder. It called it the shooting resulting in the death of Charlie Kirk, this very kind of sanitized thing. So Friday night, I wrote all this down as one of the things that I want to talk about. And then, like an hour after that, the church came out with an additional statement. So this is 2 days after their original one. This time, the statement still published on the church newsroom. This time it's attributed to the first presidency. And it says, it's only a little longer than their original one. It says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints condemns horrific acts of violence worldwide, including the recent assassination in Utah. We affirm our repeated calls to seek peace and unity despite our differences. Jesus Christ teaches us to love one another, that hate is wrong, and that human life is sacred. We urge all to reject violence and instead build understanding. Recognizing that we are all children of God, we must treat one another with more dignity, compassion, and respect. As we mourn with those who have experienced loss and care for those living in fear or conflict, we call upon people everywhere to build communities of greater kindness and love. Okay. So I do want to acknowledge that second statement. I appreciate that they put it out. I appreciate that it had more direct attribution to the first presidency. I think it was good that they called it an assassination. And, it doesn't have the names of the first presidency. It just says the first presidency has released the following statement. And that's all it says on the church newsroom website. Nothing on, and I'm now looking in real time to confirm that nothing has, happened since, but nothing on President Nelson's social media. The last thing is about his own birthday, September 9th. And then the previous thing is his op-ed a few days prior, and so nothing from the official social media channels. And I think, one of my musings here is that this is such a missed opportunity to not speak out extemporaneously, to not lead, to not, like Charlie Kirk's wife on Friday night put out the video. Very poised, very impressive woman. I'm shocked that she did that so soon after and was so composed as she was. And here she is sharing some very raw and real thoughts and providing leadership and unity and a moment for us all to kind of reflect together and process this. And all we get are some words on a website. And, the governor during one of his press conferences, he spoke extemporaneously. He talked about, the need for kind of unity, for having an off ramp to all of the division, for highlighting the fact that there's no riots and whatever. I'll talk about that in a second. But where's the president of UVU where the assassination took place? Where are the church leaders? We've got a PR statement that was just written by some corporate PR and lawyer people and attributed to, but my gosh, why not do a live stream? Why not do a vigil and have a leader speak from the heart, inspired, read not by through a teleprompter and heavily edited, but you see his wife speak, or you see even the governor speak, or you see random podcasters and all these people speaking from the heart and whatever. And I'm just like, why are we just getting 73 words? To me, it's just a missed opportunity, especially because of the proximity to Utah, especially because, as I'll talk about in a moment, it appears that the killer was raised LDS. It just feels like a missed opportunity. I want to share, relatedly, some words from, I copied and pasted a few things that I liked, and I didn't get permission from anyone, and I'm just going to share first names from those that I took this from, but they are from other people and not from me. This one from Alina, who said that the world needed Charlie Kirk because the churches were silent. In a world, she continued, with decaying morality and objective truth losing its grip on the minds of people, Charlie's voice was a light in a darkening world. How simple it was to just speak the truth in God's word, yet not enough were. The churches have always held that role. We wouldn't have needed Charlie to make it his life's mission to bring back a lost generation if the churches across America did what they were created to do, to defend God's word. Too many have jumped on the wagon of be nice or be good global citizens rhetoric that feels warm and fuzzy. They care so much about increasing numbers that they have forsaken their post on the proverbial lighthouse in favor of meeting the world where the world is for popularity's sake. And she separately said, and I liked this, that we cannot be considered good Christians for merely attending church and opening scriptures. We need to actually do the word of God. And in that other post, she was talking about how, from her perspective, Charlie was doing the word of God by talking, by having discourse, by spreading truth, by being a defender of his faith, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I can't say that I disagree. You know, we do have General Conference coming up. It will be interesting to see. Like after 9/11, we had, you know, some leaders talking about the topic more broadly of war and peace and the like. Be interesting to see if we get any commentary. But again, like it's written and then edited and then re-edited and then practiced and rehearsed and telepromptered. And I'm not going to say any of it's insincere or anything of the like. But moments like these, I think, call for extemporaneous, spontaneous, inspired words from the heart. Talked about the church. Let's talk about BYU. This morning I was texting with Senator Mike Lee about this because he's been posting on X about how how BYU refused to allow Charlie Kirk to speak on its campus. You may remember that just in the days prior to the shooting, there was some local media in Utah saying, "Oh, Charlie's coming to Utah." These, 2 university locations, and BYU wasn't on the list. And so I messaged Senator Lee. I'm like, "Hey, what's your source for this?" Because I couldn't find any like confirmation online, and he said, the day before Charlie was killed, I asked him why he wasn't going to BYU. He told me BYU wouldn't let him. Now, BYU has long been anti-political clubs. I remember like when I was there and shortly thereafter, there were people trying to start like LDS Liberty clubs, kind of like conservative, libertarian, whatever. And they said no. And anti-war stuff, they said no. Yet, BYU will host Dick Cheney, 2007. And not only that, they awarded him an honorary PhD for public service, this total warmonger and neocon and not good person. Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former national security advisor, himself this massive warmonger, and Harry Reid, like BYU will host all the wrong people, but not Charlie. They don't allow a Turning Point Club on campus. There are 375 clubs at BYU. They do allow a Republican club and a Democrat club, but that is the extent to which they will allow anything political. I don't recall if anyone's tried to start like a libertarian club or anything like that. Probably have, and they've probably been denied. There is, when you go to the website for all of BYU's clubs, a category filter. There's no political filter whatsoever. So then I wondered, well, how are the Republican and Democrat clubs categorized? Oh, they're categorized under family, home, and social sciences, alongside the Baking Club, the Emerging Museum Professionals Club, the Geography Student Association, and more. So BYU would not host Charlie. I'll let you read into that what you desire. To this double standard idea, I mentioned the governor and his remarks, and in them, he highlighted how, look at Utah, we've had vigils and prayer. We've not had the torching of cities. We've not had these riots where stores are being destroyed. And there are other double standards. Do you remember when Parler was this social media app on kind of the right, quote unquote, was kicked off of the app stores, was deplatformed, right? Because of its proximity, alleged proximity to the January 6th so-called riot at the Capitol and all of that, right? Well, I don't know if you've ever frequented Blue Sky. Blue Sky is kind of the Twitter alternative where when Elon took over and much more like free speech, when all the restraints and shackles were taken off of the conservatives and the libertarians that had been put on them. So now there's more speech, which means there's more common sense, which means all the lefties that can't defend their insane views fled to this new app called Blue Sky. And for the past several days, all across Blue Sky, there have been an insane number of posts from lefties cheering the death of Charlie, calling for Elon, calling for Charlie's wife, calling for all these other Ben Shapiro and all these people, Matt Walsh, right, to also be murdered. Like, not just, people talking about the rally and on January 6th and blah, 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 like in these benign ways. No, like actual people calling for death and murder of people who have only spoken words, because this crowd sees words as violence, as microaggressions. And yet, Blue Sky is not banned from these app stores. It's crazy, right? Like, I think a lot of people have been awakened. I have seen so many people, non-political people in recent days, kind of red-pilled, responding, waking up. There's a vibe shift that's happening. Not all people. I mean, there are massive echo chambers. I alluded to this earlier where, regarding the killer, all the lefties right now, as of the time of this recording, are claiming that, oh, look, there's reason to believe that Tyler, this guy, thought Charlie wasn't conservative enough, that he was part of this Groyper movement and Nick Fuentes and all these guys, and so he comes from the right. Whereas then on the other side, you're saying, no, all these people around Tyler are talking about how he went total lefty and Antifa and he was in Discord chats and whatever. And you have two completely different worlds and perspectives, and people are just believing made up crap. Like, it's just insane to me, the echo chambers that you get. There are questions around the killer. I'm not going to get into those because, again, things are fluid and there's so much like conspiracy speculation stuff, and it's like the early days of 9/11, It's like the dust has to settle a little bit. We need to gather more insight. We need to rule stuff out. Was he acting alone? What's the deal with the rifle? He couldn't have, like the one that they showed the photo of, he couldn't have broken that down, and there's just lots of speculation, right? Was he a patsy? Was this because Charlie was fearing about Israel because he was becoming more outspoken about the problems with Israel's government? Was Israel involved? Why is it that Netanyahu, like seconds after, was like primed to go comment? Like, there's just lots of questions, right? And I'm not gonna speculate. I'm not gonna get into that because a lot of, even on my own Facebook post where I was soliciting comments, there are people just saying all kinds of stuff. And look, I'm like a conspiracy guy, right? I wrote a whole book called The Tuttle Twins Guide to True Conspiracies. They're secret combinations I talk often about. I'm not here to say you're all nuts. Only that, like, when things are this raw and real, and especially with the internet and people are making crap up, like the one I saw right before, I saw this like for the 8th time, I should say, where someone posted this video, this Tyler guy, next to the surveillance footage, and look, they don't look alike, and but these people are just, they don't know that image of the surveillance that they're using to now spread their misinformation was AI. It was AI generated. The footage from the surveillance feed is blurry. And then someone went and put that into AI and got this other version that looks, however it looks from AI. And now other people are using that AI image compared to the actual image of Tyler and say, oh, look, they don't look alike. We are in for a lot of problems in the days to come and the years to come with even just AI, let alone just the explosion of communication and how quick people are to just share stuff that they hear. So I'm not going to get in, to all of the speculation conspiracy just because a lot of dust has to settle. I did find it interesting. Last night I was reading how the New York Post had this article highlighting how the killer, Tyler, was raised Mormon. That's how they said it. That's how a lot of people on social media were saying this guy was raised Mormon. And some people were taking that and running with it, like, oh, look, the Mormons and he was brainwashed in a cult and Mormons versus evangelicals and all this stuff, right? I mean, I know plenty of awful people who were quote unquote raised Mormon and at some point decided to stop emulating Christ and living like Christ. Being raised Mormon doesn't mean crap, This kid had his agency. Apparently he was raised in a very Republican, conservative, Trumpy kind of household. And then he went off and got brainwashed. Whether, high school is some evidence or some claim suggested, or his semester at Utah State University before he went to this technical college, or online, Discord, deep dark corners of the internet, whatever. So despite his parents raising him the way that they did, he had his agency and he made choices to imbibe certain information and ideologies that led him down this path. It is interesting that just moments before his murder, Charlie was praising the faith that his own killer had rejected. That's interesting. I've seen a lot of people concerned about, what does this say about Utah? What does this say about the way this state has changed? The culture, the rot, and if true that this kid was impacted through like Discord chats and Antifa forums and all the rest, right? Like this stuff is online. It's all over. It's all the more reason to protect your kids. It's all the more reason to be diligent, especially when those prefrontal cortexes are still developing. It's all the more reason to be diligent in monitoring what your kids are using online. Like the biggest problem that most parents have is they're not technically savvy. Their kids are more technically savvy than them, and the parents have no way to kind of monitor or be familiar with what is going on. And these kids, like this Tyler guy, are just exposed to these false narratives like, oh, Charlie's hateful and he's spreading hate and he hates black people and he hates LGBT people and and all of this stuff from the MSNBC, lefty, Antifa, all the rest, where these narratives just take root. And if you don't realize that your kids are being exposed to this, it'll soon be too late. It's too late for Tyler. I know so many parents who struggle with this, who are baffled at their kids going away to college or whatever, and online exposure. And within years or months, they come back and they're just like a totally different creature. And they've just been exposed to all this stuff. And the parents are kind of self-loathing, self-critical, wondering, where did we go wrong? What do we do? I say this on a lot of podcast interviews that I do about our Tuttle Twins work and things like that. It's like, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional. Your kids are being bombarded with crap from TikTok and textbooks and teachers and many other sources. You have to be intentional in monitoring what your kids are being exposed to and counteracting them, providing that other perspective, giving your kids a foundation. So what's our reaction? What do we do? I've seen a lot of people in the past 24 hours playing the cancel culture card. And I think not without good reason. They've been going after the employers, these people I'm referring to, going after the employers of the people who are cheering Charlie's assassination. I mean, these people certainly have what they got. They're going to get what's coming to them. And I just have to think, like, what is the mindset of a person who is like not just privately harboring these views, but for social media cred, actively publicly sharing them? Like, I can't even relate to people that do that. I found this post from someone who said that they've created a searchable database of over 20,000 individuals celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder. They're soon going to make it available on their website, searchable by location, employer, and industry type. And they're doing this, they say, as a way to combat political violence. But this is like razor's edge stuff to go after people for their views, even just insane views. And is that the right approach? Like, I think of Prop 8, California, the anti-gay marriage thing, and you had like the donor list get leaked or whatever that was, and people were being targeted at their places of employment, at their homes, right, for their views. It's like, do we really want to weaponize all of this and target individual people for what they think and what they believe? Buddy of mine, Jimmy, pointed out how when Christ was killed is when it created Christianity, and that Charlie was killed for spreading a message, for living a message, freedom, free speech, family, faith, and that killing Charlie won't silence him. It'll make his voice, his cause louder. That's what his wife said the other night. And I don't know who takes the helm of Turning Point. You can't really, Charlie was a very unique individual. People were posting from his high school yearbook how he was voted like most likely to become president, most likely to change the world. Like, this kid just had this in his DNA. And that'll be difficult for, organizations are tough, man. For my own, I think about succession, it's much different when you go from founder to somebody else, especially in a traumatic, tumultuous shift like Turning Point is going to go through. But I do think that Charlie's wife are right in that this has an opportunity to make the cause of faith and freedom, free speech, family, to be much louder. These rallies in South Korea and the UK and probably countless others that I just haven't even seen, because my gosh, social media has been hard to follow in recent days. It's just been like an avalanche. And that avalanche is part of the problem, because just one day before Charlie's assassination is when we were focused on Irina. You remember the Ukrainian girl in the Charlotte light rail train thing who was just brutally, savagely murdered by this black dude? And that, it was interesting. I asked my wife, because that happened like 2-3 weeks prior, but the video was being kind of withheld, like as someone got it from an open records request or whatever, and it finally leaked. So all over X, it's just going wildfire. People are talking about this. This is, again, the day before Charlie. And I remember asking my wife, who is, she's on various social media platforms, not X. She's pretty well plugged into current events because she'll see people talking about them and then she'll go look into them. And I asked her, like 24 hours after Irina's video and story started circulating throughout X, I had seen someone on X point out how no one from the New York Times was covering Irina's death. CNN, MSNBC, nothing. And they were contrasting, like, George Floyd and some of these other things where people would go do the research of, like, look how many articles the New York Times wrote up about, say, the George Floyd incident, right? And then by contrast, or like what's the guy's name who was, he did the chokehold of the black guy and got arrested and tried, his name escapes me, but a similar thing. Look at all the articles written about that. And then zero about Irina, because it didn't fit the narrative. And it wasn't just the New York Times, it was all these lefty rags. And so I went to my wife and I said, hey, have you heard anything about this? She hadn't even heard of it at all. And again, my wife's pretty plugged in. She's not head in the sand. So it was like contained to X, where you have maximal, or at least way, way, way more free speech, where information is flowing for good and for bad. Misinformation can flow too, right? As I've already indicated with Charlie and these claims about his killer and so forth. But we move on so quickly. And it saddens me that Irina's death and the people rallying around that, and the conversation around the rate of crime in the black community and being raised in fatherless homes and just highlighting the problem so that we can try and figure out solutions is just immediately shut down, because the next day it's like 9/11, when the day before Donald Rumsfeld, September 10th, 2001, gives a press conference talking about how the Pentagon could not account for, what was it, like $2 trillion or whatever, and or billion, I don't even remember. I get my illions mixed up. But it was a mass quantity of now I think it was billion, right? Couldn't have been trillion. Um and it was this stir, and he even said in the press conference, like, people think the enemy is abroad or whatever, the real enemy is at home, and it's the Pentagon bureaucracy. And you can find that video online, barely. No, trillion. Oh my gosh, it was trillion. I just looked it up. Holy crap. Estimates suggesting that $2.3 trillion in Department of Defense transactions could not properly be accounted for. He framed these issues as part of a larger push to modernize defense operations and urged legislative action to improve financial management. Of course, the Pentagon has never passed an audit. They fail again and again, and yet Trump is out there with his whatever his new Department of War guy is called. What's that dude's name? He interviewed me years ago on Fox and Friends, Hegseth, praising, the biggest Department of Defense budget ever. And yet the Pentagon has never passed an audit. Here's Donald Rumsfeld the day before 9/11 saying we've lost all the money. Lost. And then the next day, 9/11 happens. And then, of course, no one pays attention to Rumsfeld, and the Pentagon gets even more money, and the secret combinations and the military-industrial complex and all the rest are just rolling in the money. So too with Arena, right? Or even like with Charlie. Like, this is penetrated so deeply that I don't think we'll move off of it like we did with Arena. But you just got to wonder, like, what's the next thing that's going to take everyone's attention? And then the dust will kind of settle on this issue of Charlie. And maybe it will be a sustained thing, like it was with JFK's assassination or MLK's assassination or 9/11. And it certainly appears to be that way. But it just saddens me, like, for Arena and that whole issue, that we've already kind of shifted our gaze. And it's hard to, when every day there's something new, right? Like, how do you keep track, and how do you remember, and how do you keep the conversation going when everyone's already like, squirrel, moved on to something else? And I saw this post on X. This lady said, I referenced this earlier. She said, Charlie was a 31-year-old, capital word, podcaster. Why is this getting hyped up like it's bigger than the Kennedy assassination? What the F is going on? And of course, there's a double standard again here, right? George Floyd getting like multiple funerals, buried in a gold-plated casket while cities across the U.S. are burning, right? Using the word podcaster is clearly meant to minimize Charlie when he was much more than a podcaster. But as reflecting, like many of you are, like, why do I feel so different about this? Why is this evoking so many feelings? And why is it that collectively, like, people who had never even like paid any attention to Charlie Kirk are now looking into him and his message and watching all of his videos? People who hadn't been in church, I just posted one yesterday or the day before. I've seen many like these. This person was like, I haven't been in church in 15 years, but on Sunday I'm going, right? Like, why is it that we are all responding the way that we are? And I found certainly a lot of commentary on this. Here's one that I liked from Chad Prather. He's a political commentator, used to be on Glenn Beck's platform, apparently. I don't know the guy, but I appreciated what he said. He said, the reason you feel Charlie's death so deeply is because grief does not measure itself by proximity. It measures itself by meaning. You don't have to know him personally to feel the sting of his absence, because when a voice like his goes silent, something in the atmosphere shifts. The reason it feels heavier than so many other tragedies is because your spirit recognizes that this is not just about a man, it is about a battle. Scripture says eternity is written on our hearts, and when someone who carried truth with boldness is suddenly gone, eternity aches within us. It's like our souls know instinctively that the darkness celebrated, and that strikes us at the core. The reason you can't shake it is because psychologically, we don't only attach ourselves to people, we attach ourselves to symbols. Charlie became a symbol of conviction in a time of compromise, courage in a time of fear. And when a symbol is struck down, it rattles something primal and eternal inside us. That's why even those who never met him feel it. There's a strange thread pulling at us, and it is not imagined. It is real. We are bound together by shared purpose, by shared longing for truth, by the Spirit of God himself weaving us into a fabric that cannot be torn apart. This loss pulled at that fabric, and every one of us felt the tug. I thought that was well said. All the more reason to reflect on Charlie's call for needing the strong Mormon church back, needing voices to stand up. So I had a lot of people on my Facebook post providing questions that I should respond to. I'll go through a few of those, but here's a related one to segue in from this topic of like, why are we all feeling this way? And Charlie standing up and this cause and everything. One person said, we have the Bible, as Charlie did, the theology, the faith, and we, Latter-day Saints, have the Book of Mormon with examples like Nephi, Abinadi, Alma, the army of Helaman, Captain Moroni, etc. But it seems as a whole, we Latter-day Saints are timid, passive, and lacking courage, which is a fruit of the Spirit. Why is that, do you think? This individual went on to share their own thought, and then I'll share mine. They said, I forgot to write the name down. I think it was Dina or something like that. They said, could it be because we focus on just living the gospel and not really being anxiously engaged in the cause of Christ in our communities and nations beyond charitable and virtue signaling services? Has it to do with some doctrines we believe, or is it some deep-seated modern Mormon mentality like tradition of the fathers kind of? Yet Joseph Smith, like Charlie, was the incarnation of courage. Or is it that we're like spoiled kids of a whole curling leadership system, commanding us almost in all things that we cannot truly function without first their validation and approval? Perhaps, then, having this rigid institution of prophets prevents us from being led by the fire of the Holy Ghost. I mean, this gets back to the idea of needing extemporaneous remarks, meeting the moment, especially in our backyard, especially when the killer was apparently raised LDS, especially when 3/4 of the crowd feet away from Charlie were all LDS, especially when the question prior to his murder was about our faith, especially when Charlie was praising our faith and calling for more engagement, calling for more strength, more courage, more conviction. And it's just sad, right? That you don't see. I had someone on the Facebook post that was like, other than you, meaning me and Glenn Beck, like who else out there is like this champion of freedom and there's voices out there, and I'm not the best or the only or anything like that. But it does cause you to reflect on like what is it about our culture that leads to the temerity, the timidity, the lack of engagement? Is it this culture of kind of top down whatever and like, oh, don't want to rock the boat or don't want to, are waiting to be commanded in all things, that we're slothful servants? This is one of the focuses of my Slow Stain book that you'll hear about in 2 weeks and soon be able to buy, is that we have been compromised. We have allowed the slow stain to enter our culture, the culture of our church, the culture of our community, and it has compromised us. And stains can be removed. This isn't permanent, but it does require being aware of it, and then it does require action to address it. I was asked, it says, curious, since you're high profile, do you have a security detail? Look, I'm not doing what Charlie did. I'm not a provocateur out there with large crowds, and most of my stuff is sitting behind a computer writing my thoughts or speaking my thoughts. And I speak at various public engagements and venues and so forth, but not at that level. And therefore I've never really felt, I'm not as combative perhaps as Charlie was. And certainly on like the social issues and the things where people get riled up, but that's not really, my focus is more on the economic side and the political side. So I've never felt the need. I've had problems before where we've had to call for some police protection, and there have been, a tiny handful of incidents, but I don't think I'm catching as much flack as people like Charlie were. So short answer is no, I don't have private security. I try and maintain situational awareness. I have firearms at all the locations I need to have them for protection and all the rest. But beyond that, I'm not really attracting the crazy haters like people like Charlie were and are. I was asked if I think the death penalty is just. Before they caught the killer, Governor Cox reminded Utahns and the broader public, Utah has the death penalty. I've seen many people, Christians, Latter-day Saints, cheering that fact on and praying for a swift execution. I do not support the death penalty. I, in fact, oppose the death penalty. I, in fact, have worked legislatively to try to repeal the death penalty. The death penalty, I do not trust the government. And as for every, like, even if like Tyler Robinson could very well be a patsy, you know, and everyone's just so quick to do this. He could be brainwashed, MK Ultra stuff, drugs, compromised, whatever. Who knows, right? But even like for Arena's murder, like it's clearly on video. If there's ever a case for like a swift response and a quick jury trial and all the rest, it's something like that, right? But for every case that seems clear cut where the death penalty is suggested or proposed, there's countless others where it's far more murky, and yet the state is still pursuing the death penalty. Innocent people have been killed by the government under using the death penalty. You know, go look into the Innocence Project if you want. You will find a number of stories. People who were on death row where everyone was convinced, the jury was convinced, the judge, the prosecutor, everybody, the media, that person's guilty. And then whether DNA evidence or something else, lo and behold, they're not, but you were going to kill them. And had you wanted the swift execution that you were frothing at the mouth for, you would have killed an innocent person. Thankfully, because we're going to kill someone, the death penalty process is slow, allowing typically for repeated trials and reviews to like triple check and make sure. And even then, people are killed innocent. So it is a prolonged process, which is part of the problem for re-traumatizing the family members of the victim. It is horrible. The death penalty process, just the showy trials and better to lock away the key, life without parole, quick and easy. But then the person's still alive, such that if you later find out they were actually innocent or there's exculpatory evidence or anything, oh, hey, they're alive. You can let them go and try and, make them as whole as possible, given what you've done to their life. But then at least you're not re-traumatizing the family with all these showy trials again. It's just like lock them up, let the family move on. But because of the need to have the numerous reviews before you're actually going to kill someone, it's just like pouring salt on a wound and repeatedly traumatizing the victims. It's more expensive, therefore, for taxpayers as well. It's cheaper just to lock them up and throw away the key. It's an easy way out for the killers. I would rather Arena's nutjob murderer have to live the rest of his life. And, people are like, oh, but taxpayers shouldn't have to fund that. It's more expensive to kill them because of all the due process involved in making sure that it's done right. And you can't just say, oh, but in this case, it's clear, because whatever process you establish is the process that is used in all these cases. You can't say, oh, we have this expedited death penalty when we really know who did it, versus the more deliberate one when we're a little uncertain. It just doesn't work that way. You have the process for killing people. This is the established process, and everyone goes through that. Because people are at all levels of feeling sure versus unsure, and the evidence being strong versus weak. Like, you just can't have like, here's the fast track version, and so it's cheaper for taxpayers to lock them up and throw away the key. And then you're protecting the downside, where just in case you've got the wrong guy, despite everyone being so self-assured, they're alive and you can release them. It is far better to lock these clowns up and throw away the key, because you're not going to kill innocent people. You're not traumatizing victims. You're saving money for taxpayers. And for those who are actually guilty, which frankly, most of them surely are, they have to live with this. Death is the easy way out. So no, I don't support the death penalty. And I think it's absurd. And I think it is a byproduct of so-called Christians trying to pursue things vengefully, trying to have this Old Testament-y, oh, by man shall his blood be killed. Like, I'm sorry, that doesn't say like fallible governments with corrupt justice departments and the like. No, that's not our role. It's murder. It's state-sanctioned murder. And God has commanded us not to kill. Someone else said, for most people, could it be that the strongest strategy is to shrug off the burdens of the world and instead dig trenches to protect our families? I disagree with that. I think every man who's been warned is commanded to warn his neighbor, as it says, I believe, in section 88. I believe we are commanded to waste and wear out our lives in bringing to light hidden things of darkness. I don't think what happened to Charlie is reason to take our ball and go home, or to focus only on our families. I think it is a call to emulate what Charlie did, sharing of his self and his views with the world, to be outspoken, more dialogue, more persuasion, more engagement, more discourse, more combating the crazy, more courage, more conviction. That to me is what the moment calls for. That to me is how we honor Charlie's legacy. That is how we continue his cause. Not by digging in trenches to protect our families, but by warning our neighbors, speaking truth boldly, actively, openly, wasting and wearing out our lives to bring to light hidden things of darkness, being anxiously engaged in a good cause to bring to pass much righteousness. I mean, I don't know that the shooter could have picked a better martyr to rally people around. Charlie was kind. He was young. He was a father. Man, for his kids, they will only know him through his videos. Because I think his oldest kid is 3, if I remember right. What a travesty. But the killer picked a person who, like, his whole thing, Charlie's, was just free speech and open debate. You can't pick a better person to be a martyr for you can, technically, right? But like, Charlie was a great candidate for what we consider to be a martyr. And it will be very interesting to see how we carry his legacy forward. I want to end going back to the idea that what Christ requires of us is countercultural. This is a tough moment. We're all feeling things. The natural man's desire is for vengeance and so-called justice. And many people want to kill this Tyler guy, and they're quick to just believe whatever the government tells them. So who knows if there's accomplices and he's a patsy, and if there's other forces involved and whatever, right? But what Christ commands of us is so difficult in moments like this. And I'm just going to read the words that we have from the Aramaic to the Greek to the English, as far as it's been translated correctly. Here is what Jesus said from Matthew 5. Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans also? We cannot take our ball and go home. We cannot dig in trenches and focus only on our families and friends. We are commanded to love our enemies. We're commanded to love these lunatic nutjob leftists on Blue Sky who are cheering Charlie's murder. The response is not to fight. It's not to do what Matt Walsh is doing of, wanting to destroy these people and ramp up the culture war. That is not what Christ has commanded of us. He wants us to love them, to bless those that are actively cursing us. There are plenty of these nut jobs that are actively cursing people like you and me and Charlie who believe and advocate these things. We're supposed to do good to the very people who hate us, to pray for those who are persecuting us. So this is an opportunity, I think, as much for me as any of you, but to seriously reflect on that, to read section 98, which we're on Come Follow Me this week about how the Lord wants us to respond in moments like this. The mob is lusting after blood. The carnal man wants vengeance. We all demand justice. But Christ wants us to behave differently. There are ways to emulate his behavior. There are ways to truly be Christian, not in name, but in deed. And I think the days and weeks following Charlie's murder are going to clearly delineate a difference between who is actually Christian in substance or trying to be, and who is one in more lip service and superficiality than anything else. Charlie was a good man. We don't have to have agreed with all of his views and his strategies and, his bombastic YouTube titles, trouncing on the left and whatever, right? Like, fundamentally, he was trying to spread his conservative Christian views. And he was doing it peacefully and non-violently. He was engaged in debate and dialogue. And I think that is a good model for us to pursue in good faith to, as Governor Cox said, have an off-ramp, to have more conversation with people, to not play into the echo chambers and the fringes and the polarization, because that is what the enemy wants, whether we're talking Satan or his mortal minions. God wants us to love these people. That is, to me, a proactive term, not just to feel in love or to feel love, but to love, to do the actions of love. It's a verb. To love your enemies, to bless them, do good, to pray for them. This is the moment where we get to see who's actually trying to do this type of thing. We're not burning down cities. We've got that going for us. We're not looting. We're not pillaging. Great. Many of us are praying. We're going to vigils. Right? Great. But oftentimes those prayers and those vigils are just for us and our community and our friends and family and our tribe. Who among us is praying for our enemy? Who's praying for the people who are persecuting us? When was the last time you did? When was the last time I did? So these are the things that I'm reflecting on is I don't want to carry Charlie's cause forward. I'm not here to build on Charlie's legacy. I'm here to build Christ's kingdom, or try as I might. And to that end, Charlie was a brother in arms. Again, he loved Mormons. He employed Mormons. He's friends with Mormons. I love that about him. I love that he was building bridges, that he was trying to find fellow foot soldiers in the cause of Christ. We might come at that from different angles. We might believe slightly different things, but fundamentally it's about faith and family and freedom. I feel emboldened. I feel not like hiding, not like getting security, not like being quiet, I feel like it's time to ramp that up. Not to ramp up the culture war and the thump them and fight and all the rest, but to speak boldly about the truth. To do what prophets have always done throughout Scripture, which is to boldly proclaim the truth. The guilty taketh the truth to be hard, it cut them to the very center, but the truth still needs to be said. Whether that angers people within your family, your ward, your church, whether it makes you a social outcast. I can't tell you how many people say that kind of crap about me just because I'm trying to say what I believe and what I think is true, even though it's counter to many of our narratives and policies and practices and so forth. And I'm not the perfect ambassador for it. I'm doing my best to stand up for the things that I believe in. I hope you do the same. I hope you and your family can reflect on what this means for you. What can you do, not to emulate Charlie, but to build Christ's kingdom, to be inspired by Charlie, but to forge your own path, to follow what God wants you to do, to waste and wear out your life in bringing to light hidden things of darkness, to be anxiously engaged in a good cause. I think Charlie would be elated. I think Charlie would be elated to see thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people rising up to move that cause forward, to be an ambassador for the cause of Christ, the cause of freedom, despite our differences, despite our different perspectives, to unite on areas of common ground for this cause. So think about that. What does that mean for you? What can you do? What can I do? Something I'm thinking about as we feel all the feelings. I'll leave it there. Hope you guys have a great week. Next week, we're talking family proclamation, a stronger Mormon church, LGBT. What does that mean? What does that look like today? I'll see you next week.